Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 5 minutes in support of his motion.
Mr. Speaker, this motion will not delay passage of this bill or return it to committee. It is our last opportunity as a House to amend this legislation. Mr. Speaker, I'm here to offer a motion to recommit that is about small business survival. It is about protecting the 8 million minority-owned small businesses, the 9.9 million women-owned small businesses, and the 2.5 million veteran-owned small businesses around the country from the devastating repercussions of H.R. 582. With this motion to recommit, employers with fewer than 10 employees or annual sales under $1 million will not be forced to implement a $15 per hour minimum wage. If this amendment is adopted, mom and pop shops across the country will be protected from this bill's extreme and unnecessary one-size-fits-all Washington mandate. Small businesses employ almost half of all U.S. employees and account for 2/3 of net new jobs. 99.9% of U.S. businesses are small. We know small businesses and their employees are the most vulnerable to this radical and unprecedented increase in the federal minimum wage. The National Federation of Independent Business estimates that businesses with fewer than 500 employees will account for 57% of jobs lost to this bill, and businesses with fewer than 100 employees will account for 43% of jobs lost. Yet, my Democrat colleagues have done nothing to protect these job creators from a 107% minimum wage hike. Instead, this legislation treats big and small businesses exactly the same. Without the financial resilience needed to absorb the increase in bottom-line costs that this legislation will bring about, small businesses in towns in every congressional district will be forced to make very tough choices. Do they lay off workers? Raise prices on their customers? Replace workers with robotics? Or shut their doors completely? Congress should not force our nation's smallest and most vital job creators to make those kinds of decisions. Small business workers and their families will also take a significant hit. The nonpartisan CBO backs up this reality, reporting that mandating a $15 minimum wage would, and I quote, reduce business income and raise prices as higher labor costs would be absorbed by business owners and then passed on to consumers. From coast to coast, we've already seen real-world examples of how workers and employers will be punished by this socialist policy. One study found that Seattle's $15... Is the House in order, Mr. Speaker?
House will be in order. House will be in order. The gentleman resume. The House will be in order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have seen real-world examples of how workers and employers will be punished by such a socialist policy. One study found
House will be in order.
Washington knows best mandates that stretch across our nation, or better known as socialist policies, and we have real-world examples showing that they simply do not work. There was a very thorough study by Washington State University which showed in Seattle a $15 minimum wage law reduced total income paid to the city's low-wage workers by $120 million per year in that one city alone. The cost of living in Seattle, Los Angeles, and New York City, where a $15 minimum wage is already in place or soon to be, is much higher than my district in Pennsylvania. With such disparities in the cost of living across the country, imagine what a wage hike will do to rural areas, rural workers, represented by many of us in Congress. Mr. Speaker, despite today's booming economy and rising wages, supporters of H.R. 582 think it's best to force a punishing Washington one-size-fits-all wage hike on small businesses across America. A small business owner in the state of Washington actually said it best. Congress should not and cannot mandate its way to wage growth and prosperity because those mandates hit small business hardest. Mr. Speaker, even the liberal Washington Post said yesterday there is a trade-off in raising the minimum wage so substantially. The Washington Post went on to say those who would lose out in the form of no job at all would wind up not with less pay, but with no pay. I urge all my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this modest but important amendment to H.R. 582. The small businesses and their workers back home in each and every one of our districts will thank us for protecting their livelihood. I yield back.
House will be in order. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Florida seek recognition?
I rise in opposition to the motion to recommit.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, there's been an awful lot of talk recently about what it means to be a patriotic American. And the fact is, the answer for each of us is deeply personal. I wasn't blessed to be born an American citizen. I was born in Vietnam, where my parents faced persecution by a communist government, in part for their wartime affiliation with the U.S. military. And when I was a baby, we fled Vietnam by boat, running out of fuel in the South China Sea, when a U.S. Navy ship came to our rescue, helping us reach a Malaysian refugee camp. And a Lutheran church then sponsored our passage to America, where we became proud citizens. And although we were eternally grateful to be here, life wasn't always easy. My mom worked as a seamstress and my dad at a power plant, and together they cleaned office buildings at night, often bringing my brother and I along. My parents didn't speak English well or have a community of close friends, but what they did have, like so many immigrants, was a strong work ethic. My dad also had a labor union in his corner. And the union spoke for him, and they fought for him. My parents worked hard to make ends meet so that their children would have opportunities they themselves never had. And that's the American dream. Which brings me back to the question of what it means to be a patriot. For me, it starts with gratitude for this country and an appreciation for its exceptional qualities. This country saved my family's life. It gave us refuge and opportunity, as it has done for so many across generations. But I think patriotism goes beyond love of country. It's also about striving to make this country even stronger. It's about trying to make life a little bit easier for Americans who work hard and play by the rules, folks like my parents and like so many of my constituents. I support this bill for a simple reason. In the greatest country on earth, nobody with the dignity of a full-time job should suffer the indignity of not being able to provide for themselves or their loved ones. For a decade, the minimum wage has been stuck at $7.25 an hour, while the cost of living has skyrocketed. And there's no part in this great country where $7.25 is a living wage anymore. It's past time we gave hardworking American families a raise. They've earned it. This bill gradually increases the minimum wage in 7 steps, reaching $15 by 2025 at the earliest. This is a reasonable bill, not a radical one. CBO estimates the bill will raise wages for nearly 30 million workers and lift millions out of poverty. They'll have more money to spend in the local economy because workers are consumers too. And they'll be less reliant on government programs. And given that our deficit will exceed $1 trillion this year, that should be music to my Republican colleagues' ears. I oppose this MTR because every American who works hard deserves a fair shot at the American dream. Whether you live in Pennsylvania or Arizona or Minnesota or Florida, you deserve a raise. And whether you work for a large corporation or a small business, you deserve a raise. You deserve a living wage, and you certainly deserve $15 an hour. Public polling shows strong bipartisan support for increasing the minimum wage. Make no mistake, this MTR is simply a Republican attempt to defeat this bill because they oppose any increase to the federal minimum wage. Some oppose the concept of a minimum wage at all. Well, the American people disagree. And as Democrats, we stand with the American people. The contrast is clear. Our Republican colleagues made working families pay for tax cuts for the wealthiest individuals and corporations. Yep, you did, and now you're opposing our efforts. And now you're opposing our efforts to give those working families a raise. And that's not just bad policy, that's shameful. And when I vote yes on final passage, I'll be thinking about my parents and my hardworking constituents. And thank God, families like these have labor unions fighting for them in the workplace and in the halls of Congress. This will be one of the proudest votes I cast. I urge my colleagues to oppose the MTR. Let's pass this bill. Let's continue this fight in the Senate and in state capitals across this country. Thank you, and I yield back.